and good morning again. As for that last video, honestly, for real, do you even have to explain that I was very tired and it being 11 in the evening and going through a whole hour of at least 20 years development trying to specify specific, well, this is ongoings of present past 2000, and well, because of people still in that mindset of unknown histories, dude. Anyone born in the 80s and 70s is explained in it. I guess introductorily you'd be like, wow. And somebody commented on it like when we would have like basic talks amongst barbecues, brides and such, as generally age group of 5 years, give or take distance, 3, older and younger. What you find a 2,000-year-old person, and we're talking about someone born after 2000, the kind of people that would be, you don't even want to think of the person having a cigarette going 1999 doesn't matter, those kind of people. That's how the person would describe it. And it wouldn't really matter if it was a person with a lollipop in their mouth and such like that, but just that mentality of weirdness was actually a superstitious, not debate, but take note of the people that were alive in the 19 to the 2000s, last few years of the half century, and people actually did that at the point of the turning of the 19th century. But anyway, certain people, I literally said to do a video, or it was supposed to be written, but the problem again, because you try to consume people's adaptive amount of time that they may have in general, thinking across the board and knowing this season and time that we're in is quite interesting. Friendships, just literally, it's now community or communal understanding of people amongst each other, right? And it would start at a basic of people in secrets. There's no friends that keep secrets. That's not what friendship is based on. That is really not a friendship. That is a conspiracy. In a nutshell, that would be the conclusion of that discuss. But honestly, just amongst brothers, you think about siblings and families, and you don't even want to now justify this. Why would somebody have to do that? As if it's necessary. People not finding safety and transparency and clarity and actual truth. Some not wanting to admit that they would be lying with silence. Others not wanting to admit that they would be lying, not needing to ask questions to at least verify false information about somebody that they're accusing of something. There's so many elements, like biblically speaking, this was the beauty of the actual, you would want to call it a display in terms of informationally based, right? But it's better to, at least put things on tables in terms of the way of understanding things. The bearers of false witnesses and how they got exposed, quote unquote, in the Old Testament, how they is not really the issue. Go right to the proverb of where it speaks about first reportings. Technically, for those kind of people, it's first accusations. Secondly, it's about believing the person second coming after. And why I brought up literal first year of high schools, and using the word induction is not supposed to sound that sort of way, like initiation. No. Generally, as people in friendship circles, with the general proximity, would at least, okay guys, we need at least some time or a week or a holiday period to at least talk about these things and go through them, because of society is not understanding that children should have that liberty as well amongst each other, inclusive of, parentals and peoples, either way, still coming in and being born. That was one of the issues that actually did come up, and it was a serious question. It seemed like it was a sequential ongoing. Like, okay, the first, and they would always start with the bearer of false witnesses people. Okay, if the first person comes in and reports it as lying, and it's multiples because they end up trying to get multiple of people to do that, then the second person comes in, because out there they would have figured out by the way that people are behaving around them that they've done something of that nature. Considerably, people should know that when someone does come in, is in the second place of it, telling the truth of it, that they have understood, and accountability, 1, caring for the people that heard lies, 2, and the problem with people now in that second place being the receptors of the certain informations, right? If now their attitude or response is adverse, we always get back to the faith basing and what they would understand spiritually, which is literally the wording used in the last video that I said, faith-based, to always get back to that, what they believe in spiritually, and do they believe in God, and how the messianic complex of Jesus Christ is not supposed to be in question, which is why we're going right to the proverb, and it's a lot in Psalms, but in another way you'd have to describe and digress and literally dissect and understand. So about the first and second witnessing part. In the New Testament is there too, is interesting. But then now the way they put it seems like people's religious aspects of respective persons and positions, and not understanding that bishop, deacon, or preacher or pastor is actually, and we always said it, experienced brother, right? Or which experience, or when it's talking about the different offices like evangelism, that is ongoing as well. There can be family evangelism, there can be community evangelism, there can be intercommunity evangelism. So people need to understand that part of spirit and truth, why Jesus had to say it that way. About accusations and 2 or 3 witnesses, which was people's problem all the time, because they're like, so how do you judge and how do you understand? It's like, well, conscientially, because the Spirit of God dwells in people, the number of elements that become of play need to be understood. And for the sakes, again, because that question I said sequentially, they'll be like, okay, the first, second, and then the third coming, and then the fourth coming, which is now the awesome part of in the first place, it's interesting. Someone who speaks the truth first, then they keep getting a whole bunch of false reports, This can be exampled in a year-long prolongance. Then comes back the person who told the truth about it, even singularly again. Why even in the mention the first place was like the people's beings reported to reaction of that sort of activity. Confirmation and affirmation, words that I've literally been saying repeatedly for the past 3-4 years. The example at that point in time, and why this is talking about friendship, the need to know thing. That's the interesting part. And you don't want to have to be and it's not childish, simplicate is to say, will people tell each other everything about each other and anything and everything that has happened to each other? Good point. Should be, without question. And the first instance you get there, why would you go on the friendship basis, would be like, well, what would a friendship basis be on spirit and truth-wise? Well, absolutely awesome part. And on the reportings part of level, it's very easy to discern when someone is always and constantly speaking the truth. Firstly, for consistency's sake. Secondly, even in mass manipulations of such, problem with people's discernment of fears and such is literally in the same category of, well, wow, when someone's voice is, like if I was saying what I'm saying right now at a very high level tone of voice and very loud, or fluctuating, and people listen to the fluctuating and not listening to the messages coming out of somebody's mouth, would be the interesting part about people bearing false witness always being in low tone. It's really weird. So, it's a weird thing to explain even. You'd be exemplary and it would seem like you were bouncing all over the place and such like that. Why mentioning 20 years into 24 with prehistory of at least 6 years of age, right? Which is now actually 86, 4 years, and 14 by literally the year 2000, which is exactly why it's quite interesting how somebody would lie so bad that you'd be like, you can't count 14 years to understand the beginning of high school, and that being absolutely spot on, and it being 16 in Zimbabwe for when you would get a driver's license. That would make sense. It's very weird. Why I had to give the example of Tao and Tao Raimurapend is, seriously, how do I get this person? And when you would explain that kind of person who does things like that, and trying to conjunct that with, don't joke with people, humor is not jokes. In that whole I'm just joking fashion, there's no such thing like that. In the whole entire understanding of everybody on the face of the earth, there's nobody that likes that. There's nobody that finds that funny. And them, while we were amongst a bunch of the peers in council, at the point in time we did get to sit down and talk about matters like that and what everybody else was experiencing. The interference and where it was coming from, people that were literally like that in their attitude of thinking that it's normal. Secondly, thinking that right is a very, very, very odd word to use there, because nobody actually does even think it's right when they do that. The prolonged consistency and people knowing that, well, yeah, you think people that bear false witness don't know that. The awesome part of understanding God and Jesus Christ is that there's nobody who's lying that's going to be able to be consistent at all. It's a lying spirit that is not of a person. This is, you almost want to smile and laugh. The awesome part is like when you do care about people, you begin to understand that this is like ongoing, and people's totalitarianism often gets in the way. Why we always talk about a faith basis. So yeah, they were not random, but understanding people were like, some were just like found in the bushes, other people were like on the road lying down, other people were on a fence, on a fence, like a fence, an actual wire fencing, waking up from that. Somebody was there, yes, Lord Jesus, that was very serious. So the actual basis of friendship is people being truthful. The where you're not aware issues. So very interesting now, because what I just realized in recording the amount of videos, how much hard drive space it takes. SD cards had been around for a long time. And we remember even sitting around at one point in time, they're like, why did they seem like they took them off the market? And that was not what happened, really. The reason I'm mentioning SD cards is how to identify an actual original, like how people talk about Nike sneakers, or an actual, that's an actual, what's the baseball caps make? Anyway, that's the whole point of mention. And how that information would seem like it got lost, and other people would be like, oh, forget those people that don't know, and literally that sort of thing, those unfriendly people. Just that information being passed around. When you see someone who owns a cell phone, you know they've not done programming. It can be a 5-year-old child, but that 5-year-old child has at least understood computers, and maybe a friend had actually been on that area of interest in their lives, because as we grow and God's actual inbuilt Holy Spirit interest in what people develop and such, whether or not other people find it relevant or insignificant, the mentioning of not occupationalism in sibling rivalries or parental and childbearing rivalries, but the general example that I gave at a point in time of people would find it non-profitable to not profit off any offspring just because of that sort of thing, because one would be interested in literature and writing, and another would be a Colosseum warrior who's going to be of great note and praised by people, and that should be generally understood. And right back to the friendship part there, that sort of thing. Now that 5-year-old child having a cell phone and knowing certain things, like, okay, well, there's your system settings and you can A, B, C, and D, obviously might not know everything about it, and another person being able to explain some things that they were having problems with, and then you'd find it's a very significant example of parental value, not even knowing anything about it, and then probably being superstitiously paranoid about it, or thinking they don't have enough time to learn and stuff like that. It was a very odd attitude that, well, for the people that I knew, other people in the same generation of the same age, and they didn't have parental issues with that sort of thing, that were absolutely psyched, very, very happy and amped to know that development in life's fruits of the earth and people's stewardship of them amongst is a good thing. That was quite interesting to note, given the past 5 years, being in 2024, and someone who generally, speak at a point in time, oh, dude, but your Made in Zimbabwe song has that speech, like the specific one, and the Holy Spirit led you to select it out, and because of the 2030 agenda, who doesn't know anything about that, which is absolutely interesting, funny news in a humorous way, every time you use that word. That the literal World Trade Fair happened this year, and some people got superstitious again. You'd be like, man, really? Wow, interesting. So when I started seeing the exact clips, like on Facebook, reeling out, and you're like, oh, wow. Even the year numbers are absolutely correct. Like, yo. The video had literally explained about the young sister of Caucasian, and people were at least getting introduced to certain things. The mud bath part and explaining certain things of where that video actually came from and whatnot, because it was one of those literal years of things, and even bringing up like that whole point of people's presentings of what they've learned, what they're able to build, or it wasn't even supposed to be in that manner, which was quite interesting. imagine was a word that people used to use at that point in time, that a whole country would have to take a year off for people to at least refresh, um, review, time as it's passed, or at least recollect, constructively, obviously, ongoing as time is, as if it's like a holiday off from something, as people wouldn't even understand. Like that point in time about why the Babylonian system tying of giving and receiving is not a good thing for people. The literal context I mentioned about that in the video, that's an hour long and a few minutes, and I literally watched it after recording just for a few seconds. I was like, yeah, no, it looks like rambling, but no, there's nobody, even at the age of 5, who wouldn't understand that sort of thing, reflecting on their own life, even somebody who's 10, and on, sort of type thing. The friendship part about that sort of truthfulness, which was sad at the point in time, and being in the Zimbabwean time of 2024, the people's kind of just expecting somebody to know that one, and the worst case of it being, oh, because the person is a believer, and yes, that's awesome. And why the point of the video there, that had, it seems like a very reluctantly observant thing to say in such a manner, or viciously for some people's other depiction, to be like, well, yeah, a baby does know that it has the Holy Spirit in him. Even a 2-year-old child that's on top of a table that's maybe 4 feet up, and we would really be grateful if there was a chair there, or it would be nice if there was a chair there. There's problems, people, of the kind of expectancy that would be like, person should know. This it's a where do you put it? Very disappointing to witness certain people who would still be in that sort of superstitious adamancy to try and remain and contain themselves, not at least having to explain certain things. It again boils down to communication, again boils down to confirmation, and again to affirmation, which is continual confirmation in the initial of actually describing what affirmation is, right? Why we actually, as teenagers, basically, there are also some kids that were 10 that also understood the same thing, but it always happened in certain ways that people would go through that sort of thing. And I'd like now briefly mentioned the SD cards being at a point in time had by people, and it seemed as if they were taken off the market, and I was supposed to finish that statement with, well, it looks like they moved to a different area of devices that needed them more, because the ones that they were initially used for had already been sufficiently, quote unquote, given more space for capacity. But the bad part about people realizing, well, it's really not that case, because the way that space was calculated in necessity was not based on people's actual will and want for the functionality, which is far more. It was quite interesting on that note. And why the mention of cell phones as well. And it wasn't a test rollout again, because by the time people couldn't understand that those sort of superstitions, again, it seems childish to give examples like that. Oh no, don't tell the children how they were made. You get started something simple like that. From findings, literal societal happenings where a child wouldn't even know that he was a boy, or what a male was or a female, and that same thing that a child would not know that they were female, not know what a male or female is. And when I mentioned in the other video, at least, about Genesis, because people's identifying with objects or animals, like that one was not a new thing for people to understand how that would spin off from any LGBT nonsense, right? Seriously, because people being compared to, oh, look, the dogs are behaving like people, because you can tell it's a male dog or a female dog, and the point it's like, yes. Okay, if you go to Genesis, there's not those two words used for any creature, not even plants. Fruit of the earth in its likeness, of its kind. That's the funny thing. Not made in God's image, of God's likeness. Teeming of its kind in terms of the animals in the sea, the earth, and the air. That was like literally very straightforward. How it got so superstitiously revealing, it'd be like these people have read it that keep on saying that sort of thing. And the ones that forget afterwards, you'd be like, how would you forget that? Where else were you trying to read and seeing some sort of that sort of analogy? But you'd be saying the same things about, and the word asexual, like seahorses. technically, because seahorses are born and then they reproduce. Literally, it keeps growing, then the little ones come out. And at the point in time where you realize, and it seems as if a joke for people to ask a question like that, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Obviously the chicken. Which again spawns a lot of, and it ends up being hallucination at a point in time for anybody not being able to understand that basic part. Because you read again, it says the beast of the field and the fish of the sea. It doesn't say the sea left eggs that over time germinated. Down to the literal every single original translation of it, every single one. So friendship issues there, because we're sticking to that tone of things. Everything is in context, absolutely everything said. And why I'd mentioned, like, well, the tiredness last night did not really affect covering grounds of absolutely everything necessary. Interestingly, like, I know for some people, because of the superstition against electricity is really not supposed to be that way, at least knowing the lemon zinc and copper diode with an LED light, at least, that would be available, and what people would have to use at that point in time obviously would have to be made or quote unquote cooked in cookery and eatery in terms of productivity, and we do understand what a kiln is for, or a crucible for iron and copper and silver, and the different kinds of things that are specific and varying, and on and goes some people's misconception of, if you'd call that as if it's witchcraft or something, it's now misunderstanding. Okay, well, how do people cook and brew things for just general wholesale, or people that like packets of chips and stuff like that? The only thing they can relate to is potatoes, but you can also do the same copper and zinc thing of different kinds of elements for specific kinds of foods. So the beautiful part there, and why it all ties together, was the explanation of that blob thing that he was trying to explain, and just the mention of every single plant, every single kind of soil, every single kind of animal, if you will. The problem with people's not understanding, like, how would you digest that? Well, first you go right down to carbon, because people understand what charcoal is. And literally at that point in time, having too much experience from the get-go of Genesis itself, and actually understanding how to create a fire afterwards, they actually went too fast to having this coat of skins made for them, but at least that point understood, right? If anybody had noted that charcoal and chalk, this is a literal white char, that is a dark black char. And by the time a piece of wood is fully burned, it begins to ember, just continues embering. And if you keep on adding more kindles and kindles to it and such like that, it should not be a foreign understanding for people, which is literally the basis for everything, knowing that there's carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen and things. People used to kind of just deem, okay, so since that's charcoal and that's chalk, that means they're both just carbon, right? To be like, okay. Which was literally my attitude at a point in time that was presented. And I didn't want it to be at that time, because again, people had like spun off back into the, well, technically they were socially, some of them would be socially bullying it. Well, Prizzy knows the answer to this one and how to present it properly, instead of people fearfully bouncing back into novels. Not to even try and explain that it's not fearful to know that, oh, okay, the paint on the wall is not without any moisture, dryness, that issue. Nothing is dry. The word is descriptive. Completely wet, again, descriptive. Completely solid, descriptive. That part is not supposed to be consumingly confusing for people. It really isn't. It is so sensible that it's quite interesting that so many people would not at least take the thought of at least digesting that much simplicity. Fermentation, which is supposed to be very much understood, that, and people would always describe it destructively instead of constructively. It's always constructively. So for their own selves and where that would go is a different issue. Like I said again, people are not objects, and they're not animals, and they're not the actual soil and such. So right back at the point of friendship, and at 30 minutes it's enough to speak about that much. transparency, clarity, confirmation, and affirmation. Otherwise, in a tweet, I guess that's how you'd put it. Be like friendship, clarity, transparency, truth, and affirmation or confirmation. And you literally need to be spirit and truth wise at that point in time, which comes with, like I said, the whole much more testimonial descript of the Spirit of God lives in us. It's not exterior. People understanding that teaching and doctrine, any teachings and doctrines of demons have obviously really bad effects on people. That one just explained very, very clearly, because then people will ask themselves, so where does the white chalk come from? Where does the black one come from? Again, it would be, yeah, lack of knowledge and lack of experience are interesting things. Very, very interesting things to talk about, and the fact that just that mention of imagine a whole nation would have to take its time out. And this is actually the reason of saying that word was like for people to realize earth-wideness of that sort of thing necessary to at least review and progressively understand that portion of things and what the effect actually was, because it's already obvious there that it being the time of giving in the Babylonian system's mentality of not giving people any time of discernment. The world's doctrine and teaching does not teach anybody to keep discerning. So the patience of understanding the testimonial part that actually teaches people in remembrance and reminding the way we have it now from just pre-2000 and actually for a longer time, knowing that cameras are more than actually 100 years old. That information given at the point in time, because you'd be writing certain things down. Okay, so basically the kind of information that people foreground thinking wise miss out every day, that they either use cell phones or have given them up because of paranoias and not understanding certain things. If you ask somebody, a stereo camera, what is it? How does it work? I remember a friend actually had one at a point in time because people would keep them, and some people's words of in the superstitious sentimentality will say souvenirs or sacred objects. And it's like, oh, Jesus, wow. Well, right now at a point in time where people are so tablet, so cell phone, and you'd be like, okay, that's just the size of that one's bigger, that one's smaller. You'd be like, well, desktops are interesting because there, you're like, yeah, gaming computers are so fast, and oh my gosh, they got the liquid coolers, and when we didn't have those, it was quite interesting before they even put fans. And somebody would have woken up on the New Year's Eve of 2000 now having started thinking that it burnt out, and that wasn't the case. It was the date and the clock mechanism that was not programmed to pass off the year 2000 into 2001. It would go right back to the manufacturing date, and they would have set some of these up in what they call a banking system or a stock market without checking that kind of basic thing. And you'd wonder what would make people overlook that. Well, the superstition is in there. Secondly, the carelessness of the focus being on that exact very tying of the Babylonian giving and receiving is quite interesting, and the various stories to digress is really not cool, and that's very sensible point. And why avoidance of describing such, well, they're fearful millennials at that point in time. What happened in 1999 doesn't matter. Anything before 1999 doesn't matter. It's like, Jesus. It's a very significant one to look at. There's certain people who were like thinking the world was going to end on that year. Yeah, no, seriously. And that point in time was interesting because the house was full of people. Wow, it's New Year's. And at that point in time, the way it happened, that this now the rushing back into, oh no, you were right. And some people would have driven into some weird oblivion. And now this person has to sentimentally be sitting in the pool and having everybody just there now. And you're like, yo, I'm not, not even swimming tonight is interesting. At that point in time, oh wow, you still have your snorkel, you still have your, the people be like scuba suit. For when you're in a boat transit, the wording's not far from me. Being able to, obviously, if you're going to travel in a boat for a full 24 hours to get from one place to the other, and that's one of the kind of trips, some maybe might be an hour, some are 5, or some are 30 minutes, and in between, you can actually swim from the boat and get back on the boat and have meals and fry and cook it. That's an interestingly specific set of apparatus in terms of clothing and things that you would actually have to have. That's a quite interesting thing. So having kept those and remembering that point in New Year's, I myself was not surprised at even hearing that sort of news. It was the weirdness of the panic. for some it was panic, for others it was like, wow, it's not like we didn't tell them, but we told them. In so many ways, it's not funny. Because that was actually one I actually checked on the desktop computer that I had at that point in time. Having been on computers since 6 years old, having had your own one, which was obviously a very, very road backward, because it wasn't even because of your parents saying, no, these ones are for kids, use this one, and about gaming computers and anything, those weren't even really there at that point in time. You just need to use one of the faster processor, etc. It was very significant too, because we'd asked each other about, well, it was a couple of phone calls at a time. Dude, did you actually check if your computer goes forward or upgrade systems and stuff like that? Did you do that? Did you have to buy the disk? Were yours available at all or not in the computer stores? And well, there were various points of that where people, no, mine doesn't. Okay, well, we'll have to see if it goes back to the manufacturing date. You can scroll all the way back down the list and check as far as back it goes. The people that were quite understanding was like, wow, okay, this one is scrolling back so far, the manufacturing date won't make sense. You'd be like, that's a serious confusion, but it won't go the opposite direction. I'm serious. You'll get smacks on 2000. Like, it's weird. You're like, okay, well, we'll find out the answer afterwards. That was like one of the most interesting things. Yeah, friendship. We're talking about friendship here. Like, seriously, transparency, truth, and spirit. And the confirmation and affirmation part was the very most beautiful thing, because when people actually, we saw this happen in clusters, the truthful people were always friends no matter what, even if people lied about each other. And the truthful people never lied about anybody. This is quite interesting, because it's the months and the days, and whether it was grade 7 or grade 6. Sorry, my finger slipped and hit the stop record button, and I was ending at that point in time it was about grade 6 or grade 7, and that was quite an important piece of information. My finger's not, oh, it was on the mic hole, just covering a little bit. That was an important piece of information, and in the 5th grade, some kids had the conversations of a lot of other things, and while we're talking about friendship, clarity, transparency, and spirit and truth, and confirmation and affirmation, right, was literally, again, what we noticed was when people knew everybody was truthful, are all friends at all times, always, whether you're new to somebody's eyes meeting them or not, or even informationally, experientially, that never changed. But people who like lies and not wanting to tell or be truthful entirely 100% used to group themselves in, starting from clusters of 2, which looked like they were growing, but it was a very disintegrated thing, which is very important to understand in terms of social behavior and actual people's encounters and whatnot. So that digression of information, why I'd mentioned the false witnessings, and why that is such a very important biblical understanding and discernment of the first witness coming and being truthful, the second witness coming and being a lying one, or the first witness coming and being a lying one, and the second witness coming being a truthful one. Some people would totalitarianize overallly, and it would depend which situation or what kind of thing you're talking about. Like, oh, so if you're actually the truthful one, you just wait until people ask the question, and the people who are asking questions are supposed to be honest ones. This is why we mentioned in the first example of being like, look, because even people who do the lying know the prolongedness and why they try to swamp it, and even though it's not consistent, etc. and whatnot. Also bearing in mind caring for people who are on the other end, or who are going to have to at least ask questions, or if you present yourself afterwards, why they should not be fair. And usually it was people who are fearful of, after someone's gone and told a lie about you, being scared to say anything. It's not a judgmental thing to consider that, which is beautiful. Why I said, even those people who do that sort of thing, they always sell themselves out too much. And the mention of hospitability and such, it's quite interestingly important. So the wisdom is there, the understanding of, well, again, there's another aspect, right, in the bearing of witness by 2 or 3. Awesome wisdom that our Heavenly Father has, why the Spirit of Truth is that awesome. Because they'll always start to try and take examples from that and then use that for false information. It's not going to work at any point in time. They would send 2 or 3 people saying that they saw something of someone, which was quite interesting. And the awesome truth part is exactly the matter of the friendship part. People becoming friends based on doing that kind of evil and things that are in the dark. That's totally different from people who are friends and brothers and sisters in the light of things. So, and examples to give have already been enough, and it was a very beautiful one to explain the 1999 portion of things and how many people probably wouldn't have thought about it, asked about it, thought it significant or insignificant. The ones that thought it insignificant being not a very good example of anything referential in that sort of thinking of manner. So yeah, it's a good place to end it. And yeah, the one about rest, these are things that are supposed to come at the point in time. I have to be truthful about this one. Literally, this is 2022. Yeah, when I started writing about that much, I was about to I was actually in the middle of it for quite some days. It takes a long time. The Blue Letter Bible, Harmony of the Gospels, Matthew, Luke, Mark, and John. Like putting them all, it's a big chart you need. You literally need a wall-sized one, or you're talking about including a ladder and such. Writing them. Like, that's very serious. And I was doing that with papers that you'd put one here, put another one under, and pick the significant ones. You'd be like, okay, do you do it by the miracles? Do you do it by the... You need to do it by the whole thing, but okay. It's still a condensed one, by the way. That's another thing that people didn't understand about the actual ministry package there, because it's not the entire everything, and in each one, the actual written account of it that is in each Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, which is the beautiful part, why you still need the Bible and Word of God to be able to actually utilize it. Is a very small... Okay, sorry. So I literally need to end that really quickly, and because it's got to do with spirit and truth and transparency, communication, confirmation, and affirmation. The point at which people realized that they wanted or thought it appropriate for anybody to keep quiet in terms of that being the reason that they wanted to prolong people keeping quiet is not sensible at all. It's really not sensible. It's quite making the issue a lot worse because of the first reason, someone not telling the truth and wanting people to not say the truth because of people who they think are taking advantage of the truth. There's no way to do such a thing. That's in a nutshell of explanation and why being about friendship, and that's a good way of talking about people amongst people. So the various examples given are very small ones, very seemingly general, very seemingly suitable to apply across the board, but still to identify and actually discern individually in terms of circumstance and individual happenstance. The demographs, decadence is a very, very interesting word. When people were thinking about always trying to flatten things in the totalitarianism, people try to apply things. And when someone says applying things across the board, spirit and truth applying things across the board is one of them. That doesn't have the issue of you have to flatten everything out. A good example for the technique exposing life story part, because of the accountability and relevance of this recordings and such, having done these kinds for some time now, and ending this one with my son, and having exposed at least a single, and the picture's still there on my YouTube, yes, as well, or Facebook. This really is a YouTube over Facebook at a point in time, but where I'm having a rolled tobacco, spending time with my son. I actually don't have the accused food being eaten at that point in time, which literally less than 24 hours afterwards, telling him what happened, accuses. So he's rolling a wee with his son in the picture, and you're like, Jesus. You don't even ask at that point in time. So, dude, you haven't been telling me which account of a Facebook account you have, where it's probably multiples, and you don't even say that thing at the point in time. Go to Tadazapas, he's sitting in his usual seat there. He's looking at the situation. And why saying at that point in time, keeping quiet about things that you should not have been keeping quiet about, and seeming as if it's a solution to you having kept quiet about them. my son shouldn't have kept quiet about it. At that point in time, he already knew that was not. It was tobacco. Even at the point in time of rolling up stubs of cigarettes, because when you're buying rolling tobacco, in the bulk that it is, there's a difference between the flavored ones that you only find in the boxed form of manufacture, which would be menthol or, I don't know, double flavors and stuff. You'd be like, well, that's a bit too pricey. etc. and whatnot. The cheaper one, even just being the unflavored rolling one that you have to hand roll and it look like a piece of paper if you used a piece of paper. And somebody's like, oh, and when your finger slips to the side of the screen, and they're like, oh, it's like, oh, they'll think it's weed or something if you roll it. So he ends up just calling it that. That ended up being a resultant of that specific day. The picture's there and my son's playing on the computer, but that's a long time ago. That's quite a few years into the past first decade before we get into the one after the 2015 period of time of certain things to mention. So with my son's mention of at this point you're like wondering, how did he get a thought like that in his mind? Because he doesn't think like that. And God's like, who would have tried to put that in his mind? By the time he reveals this, is now his response is going to seem forensic for himself. Someone's trying to sow division, his exact words, of him supposedly accusing me of stealing his ball. He put his broken iPhone away somewhere in his room and it went missing, and somebody obviously stole it between the few people of relativity that would visit the house. And that time, John Moraba, the person who sabotaged the cell phone that I had right after October 22, and 22 meaning 2022, being the person to say that he was lying. He was not lying at all, because he never accused me of anything like that. Before, in some years before, him being much younger, saying, oh, Dad, I finally get it, me playing video games is just like you smoking, and you're like, tobacco and a computer are not the same in that sense, but you would have some point reasoned with things in the computer that you're making contact with or playing with. And concept of eating, I think you already realized, but it's really not the same thing. But his silence afterwards, in accordance to that mentioned project technique thing being found in his room at a point in time, realizing, oh yeah, these briefcases that you used to have or find, or they were stored in a bunch of places, because there's a bunch of BAFs, which is hardware retail that closed down. And it was interesting to find out that Town had actually owned the franchise of it, which was trying to go multi-local, and Litos from D4 to D90, and the just changing of that number name was not supposed to be far from referential relevance, if that's what I'm understanding, right? The fraudulence that he was doing. And why you would have found so many of those briefcases, and you just ended up using them when you were growing up and stuff. And then you find out, oh wow, this kid has actually got some writings of things that he was doing at school in grade 6 and 7. Why wouldn't he have told me about that? Oh, this has to do with the time we walked up the road and down, firstly just having to go to the shops. It was in the evening and night, and go was not as opposed to anything of us walking at night or going out at any point in time at all, even if it was 24 hours or 48 hours, which I would have been able to spend that much time with them. But it had something to do with him particularly in that day, because you're walking down the road just to get some candy, because he likes lollipops a lot, and you're like, oh wow, I could actually get him more than 20 right now, and let's go and like get a bunch. And you're not even trying to lure anybody into any confession or anything, and he ends up saying, what you've been asking, dude, I can tell this stuff been going on at school. You've been a boarder for this long, I know boarding schools and whatnot. And he's been keeping quiet about it, and you've been wondering, what is he keeping quiet about? Hoping it's not bullying. And no, it's just got to do with something else. Interestingly, calling it financed bullying would be a whole different dimension of things. So as we're walking down the road about to cross the street, he's like, Dad, let me tell you what happened before we get to the crossing part. There's this thing that kids kept doing at school, and you can tell he's like reluctant, as if he shouldn't be telling his dad, because like, my dad is so awesome, he's always been truthful, and that guy can always, and I'm like, dude, okay, please just quickly, like, honestly, you really want to get it out quickly in this day. Talking about a game called Submission, which kids would just gang up on a child. They mention in the one video there of these past two, where that kid in the corner who just got punished by the teacher for bullying, thinking to himself that he's supposed to be doing that because it's in the same category of the dimension of finance bullying, right? And you don't even have to ask your son at that point in time, how many times. You're like, okay, so if that's what they were doing, why didn't you tell me earlier? I'd been asking you continually. There he doesn't want to answer. It's a fear issue. You're okay. But I tell him not to be scared. Okay, it's awesome that it's in the dark at this point in time. We're just crossing the road. It's awesome, at least how he can trust you to cross the road. And you're like, okay, wow, somebody's got him to a point in time of thinking that his dad will be crossing the road and with him and wants to not help him cross the road. And well, we got to the shop, bought the sweets and came back. Well, walking back up, he's now on the happy side of things. But you're like, dude, there's some details you need to give me about that. What you just told me there while we're crossing, getting to the shops and such. And while you're walking, you're busy asking a few specific questions, not getting entire answers. By the time someone says something like that, to think that using a cell phone is the same as eating and drinking, you're like, no. That's too totalitarianism. And why mention of a certain person like that who would be like, how do I get this person to not want to talk to anybody? Would have been in a game plan and a strategy. The only thing you can commend anybody for anything is analysis. And honestly, if they don't use it properly, that's their own issue. Nobody's going to commend the way they used it. That if he tried to slide that in before he got to his dad and actually said it, he would end up getting annoyed of how the person did the continuity, which is the right way to say that, of, they're not really the same thing, but the first thing he says is as if he's the person he's saying it to, and childishly. And as smart as my son was at the first time, he probably just kept quiet. Obviously, you knew that much. But that even having been out in the open and said, no, and him referring it again to moments where you would have gone to his room and have to ask him about certain things. Oh, wow, dude, and that's a phrase that literally came out. So you found out that all your friends at school were actually lying. It's like, yep. And this is after you've given him a bunch of the section 1, 2, 3s, and 4s, when you're able to print them in ample abundance and such, and at least share them with people. Certain others rejecting, some actually responding very well, and actually etc and whatnot. More than just neighborhood and even nationwide-ish, but still people ongoingly, and because it's just not a nationwide thing in different places and whatnot. Bible scripture and understanding is very important. So finding that briefcase, specifically for Bath's one, filled with the Project TeQ thing, so when you asked him about it the first time, would be quite significant to be the keeping quiet and why mention of the friendship issue, and people not noticing is now trying to butter things up that they're lying in silence, because the kind of things that his friends were lying about should have been actually very basic to understand, having to do with that. And questions of why would you have to talk about that afterwards? Right back at the point mentioned there of people just expecting, whoa, no, because the person believes in God and has the Holy Spirit within them should just know, so those things don't need to be talked about. Wow. So the Holy Spirit doesn't remind you or keep you in remembrance ongoingly and unlearningly, because you've understood that coming to the knowledge of the truth and understanding means that we don't stop learning. Experience has to do with that. That's the generality of it from the get-go. It's a whole bunch of mess there at certain points in time. So yeah. And noticing that your son would say that exact phrase that your father would say to you, and not telling you why he was saying it. Because you're my best friend, that's what to me while you're thinking about everything I've just said, and in the video before, and why I mentioned about tiredness, literally just the thinking point, and people thinking that thinking doesn't have any energy wise to it, and relevance of having to reflect, and at least taking that amount of time testimonially, whether it's outwardingly, in whichever way it comes out, if there are people there or not, and being able to record it, even if you're not able to record it, or even not able to outwork it in the saying, as if it doesn't have the, you've been awake and have been doing something. We all have those points and times in our lives. So when your son was telling people that you're and being asked, so you're saying your dad is your best friend, but you don't want to tell him things, that's an issue. Where now my confirmation and affirmation overlap didn't reach any expiry date at all, because like I had mentioned, all people in spirit and truth, at any time we always realize that point, there's no time to not talk about anything in spirit and truth. There's always the appropriate time, and being able to, if it's a small thing even brought up and needed to be talked about, And if you end up expressing it as a later time, a later date, it's really not that much. It'd be like, oh, well, when this happens and this happened, A, B, and C, and D, and Y, we'd never have those problems. But the keeping quiet part, and someone not even expressing, oh, yeah, wow, I didn't even think about that. Oh, dude, wow, by the way, the thought passed at a point in time, and I was waiting for you to ask. I didn't know when the next time we were going to talk about it was. Those are general and normal things. That has been one of the problems with people communication-wise, confirmation-wise, and where the affirmation comes from. Especially how blessed we are in this digital age to be able to communicate at least, through SMSs. Can make groups. Can ATC and whatnot. The transparency, the spirit and truth, the communication, confirmation, affirmation, and people not wanting to admit that they are conspiring is the most interesting part to actually digress and divulge into the actual spirit and truth of. So that's a good place to end, as much as speaking about friendships. Still in general, for my sakes, it's a lot of partials of testimonial, but that actually being the case of the most for what I've mentioned. Yeah, right, it takes time to actually digress and go into things. This ends up actually almost being another hour long with this 10 minutes that I've just added on top of just sometimes accidentally. You're holding it with one hand and you're not using a selfie cam or selfie stand for the cam and your finger. It depends what kind of phone you're using for your recording desktop and things like that, because you're focused on the etc. Yeah, I'm gonna let that end here. I said it wouldn't have been a write out of basic, to tell if somebody's your friend or if they're not. A, B, C, and D. You still have to give the same kind of cases of accountability that people would have across the board experienced in their life, whether it's them having children, whether it's them being single parents, whether it's them being dual parents, whether it's them being children themselves, whether it's them being just brothers and sisters amongst, and even everybody overall, considering each other as children of God all the time in spirit and truth in Jesus Christ. So it is definitely a good place to leave that. And it's a Thursday. Literally, this is now the 24th of October. Yeah, very awesome. Thank you, Jesus, for real. So I'll catch y'all later.